Welcome to the Neijiaquan podcast. This is Isaac. This is a bi-weekly podcast where my friend Jess and I discuss internal martial arts and Qigong and meditation. This week we talk more about Liu Hung Chieh, a bit about his Tai Chi, also about the comparison between the Wu style and the old Yang style a little bit. Then we discuss the first swing of the energy gate set and some of the finer points on how to protect yourself while you're doing that. Also, the first half of our interview with Lee Birkins is up on the Patreon, so check that out. Okay, thanks for listening and enjoy the episode.
Welcome back to the Neijiaquan podcast with Isaac and Jess. We're continuing our discussion of Opening the Energy Gates of Your Body by B.K. Francis that contains a lot of both stories about training as well as the training itself and a lot of good exercises. We've been working our way through the preface of the book, the foreword of the book, giving the author's biography. And we've reached a section called Beijing Again, the Final Lesson with Liu. So it says, summer 1983. Liu was in meditation retreat and unavailable when Kumar arrived in Beijing. So it sounds like he made the trek all the way to Beijing from Hong Kong. And by the time he got there, the teacher's gone. So there was no, you couldn't call ahead, I suppose, in early 1980s China.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if this is exactly, but I think that's when he hooked up with the dragon, he did the dragon and tiger stuff and some of the other stuff that he did when he was in Beijing.
So he may have tooled around to see some other connections he had.
Yeah. I think that's Feng Zhishang, right? Wasn't he in Beijing?
Yeah, Master Feng in Beijing, right.
I think that was when Liu was busy, he went over and hung out with Feng Zhishang.
Another letter from Bai Hua, his teacher in Hong Kong, enabled Kumar to study the inner technology of Yang style Tai Chi with Lin Du Ying in Fujian province. So Lin Du Ying is a name in Tai Chi that you hear sometimes, but he's not very well known. It sounds like he was a high level disciple of the Yang Ban Ho lineage. And it says here that Kumar had studied a bunch of different Yang style with different teachers. He had great respect for Lin Du Ying, deeming him the most exceptional practitioner of the Yang style he had ever seen. Since Kumar had been accepted as a formal disciple, he was given the information openly. So it sounds like he got a good session in with Lin Du Ying, and it's the only time I saw that Lin Du Ying was that picture in the front of Bai Hua's book. His Chinese language text has a picture of a younger Lin Du Ying, but as far as his biography, I don't know much about him. I know the other book has some stuff on him.
Yeah, that's the only thing I've ever seen. That was what Bruce refers to as the old Yang style, right? So he talks about there being the Yang style from Yang Chengfu's uncle and
right
that stuff.
Do you ever see him do that for him?
Yeah.
Show parts of it as perhaps a contrast to Wu style or in connection with Wu style somehow, which is a older version of Yang style.
Yeah, I mean, I saw him. I'm seeing him do bits and pieces of it, here and there. And
what's your impression of the differences in that? Maybe off the top of your head.
It's very long, right?
So it's form or the stances.
Oh, the stances, everything's very extended. It's got this really extended, full power thing the whole time. These really low stances, and for example, all of the any time you pick up your foot, he picks it up almost to his waist.
Mm-hmm.
So if you think of doing brush knee, every time that front foot would come off the ground, it would be straight out in front of him. And then, listen to this extremely low stance and
pretty stretched out.
Just
kind of opposite of Wu Jianchuan style.
Externally, it's complete opposite. Internally, it's almost identical. In fact, I think a lot of what he teaches is that they're interchangeable in a sense. I mean, when he teaches the yang style and he teaches the Wu style, the internal part, it's the same. It's just, the external frame is just a 180 in terms of, one's the big and one's the small. But he always said, essentially they're the same form. It's just one's, the large frame and one's the small frame.
Right. Because, I mean, those uncles were the students of Yang Luchan, and Chuen Wu was the student of Yang Luchan. So they're part of the same.
And they certainly had specialties or whatever, so I think that's part of it too. But yeah, no, that was the main impression I got of it, was that it was really big. And the other thing was that it seemed to really have a lot of the opening closing stuff in it.
Right.
That expansive thing, and then squeezing everything down, and
that's characteristic of his Wu style for sure.
Of all his stuff.
All the stuff for sure. Although not so much opening the energy gates, which is the one set that doesn't, that's before you kind of get to opening and closing, even though it's part of it, obviously. That's one of the skills that isn't.
But it's almost like it's the opening part, right?
Opening, yeah, you're right.
It's not the pulsing, but it's just the getting the space. So if you look at older videos of him doing energy gates, the cloud hands is much more extended.
It's that Tai Chi cloud hands that comes around.
Yeah, and like a large frame Tai Chi, where now it seems to have morphed into more of like the Wu style, where
right, oh yeah, you're right.
It has a bit more of the bending and stretching, and
that's how I learned it.
I think when you're teaching people that aren't experienced in Tai Chi or martial arts, it's the easier way to go. Get people to soften up first.
So moving on to the next section here. When after 9 months, Liu Hung Chieh was finally free, Kumar joined him. Liu prescribed Wu-style Tai Chi. This style emphasizes soft healing and meditation. It strengthens the body and clears the mind. So it sounds like that's when he got into the Wu-style Tai Chi after he returned to Beijing to train with Liu Hung Chieh on this later trip.
Right. I think it was the last thing he really taught him was that stuff. So
this covers the period from 83 to 86,
right,
when he's training in Beijing for a couple of years straight.
Yeah.
That Wu style Tai Chi. Now you've done some of that Wu style Tai Chi. I did it with the short form with him, but I know you always have been into the long form.
Quite a bit, yeah.
What would you call what are your impressions of that long form? I know for one thing it's really long.
No, I mean the thing that I think maybe makes it a little bit different is it tends to do this longer, compared to other Wu styles, it's a bit longer. Liu had, you've seen that picture of Liu doing single whip. He's like really stretched out and really low down. I mean, his
stances are always pretty short.
Yeah, it's short stances, but very long, extended postures, so that there's a lot of internal stretching, right? So it isn't that your feet are really far apart, but it's that everything inside of you is opened up as much as you can open it up comfortably, right? So that's the sort of physical characteristic of it, and then the internal thing is the heavy emphasis on the opening and closing, right? And that the opening and closing of the joints, and how that is essentially the mechanism for creating the four jings, right? The Peng, Lu, Ji, and An. It takes that piece from heaven and earth, and energy gates are the main components of it. If you're familiar,
that pulsating, that opening and closing really strongly, and then all those alignments of energy gates.
Right. So it's opening, closing really strongly, but in a very confined way, right? So instead of doing an external big stretch as you open and close, you might not move your arm in space at all, but that opening and closing allows you to do things inside your body. It's a lot of stuff with internal pressures and how you're moving things internally. And cloud hands is the basis for all of it, but it goes much further than that. But it sort of all starts with just that thing of being able to like use the qua and use the hips and coordinate that one part moves, all parts move, one part stops, all parts stop. That seems to be the central principle of all of the Tai Chi that Bruce taught.
I mean, that goes through it all for sure. Yeah.
Especially the Tai Chi, because like with I only really did the Wusta. As far as I know, he taught the Chen Pan Ling form in Denver. So there were a few guys. I met like two people that had learned the whole thing.
Yeah, Lee Berkins was telling us about that. He did that.
Right. So Eric Peters, I think, did most of it. Lee, and then I met one guy, this real tall, skinny guy I met who had done the whole thing, and he could still, he still practiced the
Wow.
whole. Yeah. And that was a dude, that was the Hung Yishang stuff and Wang Shujing stuff. So
and he did the Yang 24 Yang style
right.
24
yeah. I don't know anyone who learned that from him.
Right.
I'm not sure he ever taught that publicly. I think I think he went sort of from Chen Pan Ling to Wusta. I don't think there really was a period where he taught, traditional Yang style, except sort of by request, people, because people already knew it. So way more people are familiar with the Yang style. So it's you just get a bigger group if you teach that stuff.
Sure.
And then recently, he's sort of resurrected the old Yang, as he put it, and did a short form based on that. But I think he, made it a little bit less grueling than the original form may have been.
Hopefully.
Yeah, right.
So that covers that little section. And the next they get into learning meditation in Beijing twice a day in 2 or 3 hour sessions. So 2 or 3 hours a day, twice a day. That sounds really, speaking of grueling.
Yeah, that's like 6 hours a day right there.
Yeah, that's 4 to 6 hours a day.
That's a hell of a, if you just did that and nothing else, that would be quite a bit of training.
Yeah, that was gnarly. That sounds like incredibly demanding.
Yeah, I mean, I think
it's no joke.
Right. I mean, I think that was the both of their sort of shared interest was the meditation part of it. So they kind of focus on that. I think Leo also knew that Bruce needed to work on certain aspects, and so that was the way to do it, because he already knew how to fight, and he already knew, like how the body mechanics of it worked. So it was like, well, here's the next piece of it.
It's kind of a natural progression of martial arts to meditation in this internal group, internal martial arts group.
Yeah, and it was, I think, Leo's kind of specialty.
He had a meditation method that he had spent his lifetime cultivating, so he had this really special system. I mean, even when you look back at some of the other masters we profiled, you take Zhang Jinfeng of Taiwan. He was a meditation practitioner, but Wang Shujing also in southern Taiwan, he's a meditation practitioner. Even Ueshiba in Aikido was way into, meditative practices. It just seems like the more internal martial arts you do, there's often a stream of people who will take it in their older years towards meditation,
Exactly. And I think, the way he put it to me was, he had learned meditation, he had learned martial arts, and he had learned healing, but all in separate systems, if you will. And he said what Leo just taught him was how to put that all, and how it all connected, and how to put it all into one sort of cohesive unit.
Yeah, and Kumar will sometimes talk about spiritual martial arts, as I think that's what that's getting at. There's this type of martial arts where they add the spirituality, healing, other stuff overtly into it, making it a even more complicated process, but more satisfying in a way, because it doesn't end with just martial arts.
Yeah, I mean, I would say in some ways it's sort of a how would you put it? You're combining them, right? So instead of having a sitting practice and a martial practice, you do them at the same time, right? Or at least you're doing things that are continuous through both, right? So like, for example, dissolving is something you learn in Qigong, but you do it in martial arts and you do it in meditation.
Right.
So it's a common technique, if you will.
That helps all three, if you ask me.
Yeah. Same with like opening and closing. I mean, even though, like, for example, if you're doing a sitting meditation, you're not going to be opening and closing that much. But if you can, keep the vertebrae in your spine supple and keep the pumping going in your leg joints, you can sit for longer, So it's just a question of, having comfort in your body, right? And then
Yep.
if you're doing martial arts, it's about sort of clarity of mind or, something like that sort of stuff.
Moving on to the next section of the book, we're still working our way through chapter 6, Cloud Hand, spiraling the upper body. Now, the fourth exercise here is called sink one side to raise the other. The next technique establishes a simple pumping action in the body so that the energy rises up one side of the body and drops down the other. So this is the one where you stand with your arms at your side and you shift one way and one of your palms sort of rises up, then you shift to the other side and that palm rises up. So you're not twisting your waist, you're not doing anything, that mechanical. It's just side to side, pump up and then pump down, kind of is how I think of it.
It's Bruce always just described it as an elevator, right? One side goes up, one side goes down, and that like there's the down causes the up was the phrase he would use a lot of the time. So that as you shift to your right leg and your right hand comes down, right, that downward pressure causes the left one to come up. So you're sort of reversing the natural tendency, which is to generally focus on the hand that's coming up and just forget about the one that's going down. And so it becomes this sense of this downward flow being the more sort of dominant piece of it,
And I'd throw in that like sometimes my strongest feeling is like it's almost like the whole half of my body is sinking, getting heavier into the ground, while the other half of my body is rising up. Both the low, there's like a physical feeling of heaviness in one side and a feeling of lightness on the other. So you're dividing your body in half,
exactly,
up and, down the middle.
There's no crossing of the left and right sides, right? Like
as he puts it here in the book, as you practice this pulley action, it is imperative that the sinking hand cause the other hand to rise, not the other way around.
Yeah.
So the pressing down is like squishing the toothpaste up the other side, kind of.
I mean, this is the principle of Pong, essentially. The idea that the metaphor is always the sense that you push the ball down into the bucket of water, right? That all you have to do is let go and it comes back up, right? So that it's the downward force, the pressing down that causes that upward spring, right? And if you get that downward force, you don't have to, quote unquote, do anything to get the other hand to come up.
And it says here that you'll shift 100% from one side to the other. So that's part of that heaviness. Physically, you've got 100% of your weight on one side. So it's pressing into the ground harder on that side, which creates that downward sinking, even physically and energetically together, kind of.
Yeah, that's one of those things that's gradual. Most people initially putting all of their weight on one leg is more than, they can handle. So you do it like 70-30 or something for a while and then work your way over to getting all your weight on one foot. But yes, ideally the timing of it is that when your hand finishes the drop, you are all the way weighted on one foot, right? And so that there's this, again, the phrase is one part moves, all parts move, one part stops, all parts stop, right? That, as soon as either one, your foot, your hand, your waist, any part of your body stops having a ability to move in a certain way, everything stops, right? So you don't push things to catch up to the strong stuff. You keep the strong stuff, sort of dialed back to the weaker stuff.
Yeah. That's it's kind of counterintuitive a little bit.
It's very counterintuitive. I mean, and essentially because, it's all just going back to that 70% thing of, don't push yourself, but this is giving you a mechanism for sort of reinforcing the, if you will, the yin side of it, right? The side that's coming in and down rather than always focusing on the up, the pushing out, right? Because
hands up in the air.
Yeah, and I mean and essentially, the way to think about it is very few people have a hard time bringing energy up and out, right? Like that's easy to just, all you got to do is like get excited or angry or bring up some sort of like yang emotion, right? And then your body can stretch out and you can feel sort of I mean, that's why people do things where if you stretch a lot or use your muscles a lot, you feel a quote unquote high, right? That high is because you're taking things to that sort of extreme where
energy's rising. That feeling of rising into your head, that feels good.
Well, and the high that comes from it is when that thing rises up to a certain point, it releases, right? And the way energy gates works is it's the opposite. You're not trying to go up as far as you can and out as far as you can. You're going in and down as much as you can. So what it's trying to get at is this idea of if you press down into the earth, it will push back up. So if you go down, it will come back up. But if you just go up, your energy, your intent, there's nothing stopping it. So it will just keep going up. So it's like bouncing a basketball, right? You're getting used to this sense of if I want something to go up, there's an equal and opposite down, right?
Yeah.
To keep me rooted, to keep me stable, right? So even though the forward hand might be, the up might be the more, let's call it exciting hand, right? The downward hand is the more, that's what's creating the stability for everything else to happen. So it's, it's like it's a paradigm shift because, if you think about how most things, like, if you just take boxing or punching something, right? The focus is on the front hand and the backhand's just kind of there as a defensive mechanism. This essentially would be the idea of grabbing somebody's, arm and pulling them into your fist, right? That it's the pulling motion that's creating the force, not the pushing motion.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, it's that counterintuitive sense that the yin is creating the yang. That downward energy allows this effortless rising to come up the other side,
right?
Which is essential to cloud hands.
Right, and that's a recurring theme in energy gates because you have, like, for example, with the dissolving is a downward thing, and now you're sort of doing a physical motion that's also focused on a downward thing. So it's like carrying.
The downward flow is kind of the theme of energy gate set, one could say.
It's the theme of water, which is right. So energy gates is the water element qigong, and what does water do? Water sinks. And water soaks into stuff, right? So it's heavy. So if you think about the standing practice, the sinking, right? That's the sense of just your mind being able to move down through your body. And then there's the sort of absorption or soaking into it, that's the ability to actually go into, to go inside, not and feel stuff other than just the surface, And so that, like I said, it's just a recurring thing. And so now you're getting into a physical thing that carries on that theme.
So now we move on to the fifth exercise, spinning silk with the arms and legs. So he calls this chansujin, spiral energy that gives natural power.
Mm-hmm.
So this is the beginning of the discussion of spiraling. Natural joint movement and energy flow in human beings moves in spirals, similar to the structure of the DNA helix. You can move in a forward way, but if you have this sort of additional twist to it, it becomes spiraling or twisting silk in Tai Chi. In Xingyi and Bagua, this idea is called luo shenjian, or drilling or twisting strength, which is taken from the action of drilling a screw into the wall. The names are different, but the function of the same. So that's at its most basic physical movement. Twisting is your palm turning over from down to up as your arm extends.
So if you turn your forearm, right?
Okay, yeah.
Because that's really more, because your hand can do lots of things, right? Your forearm really can only twist one way or the other. This is sort of jumping ahead a little bit, but there's turning and there's twisting, right? And then there's spiraling. So just to first get a sense of, if you just turn your forearm over, right, your hand flips over, but it doesn't go anywhere. Your hand stays in the same place.
That's stationary. That's twisting.
No, that's turning.
Oh, that's turning. Okay.
Twisting is now you're going to extend your shoulder a little bit as you turn your hand over. So your hand actually physically goes forward slightly, but everything in your arm is turning in the same direction. Okay. Like, so your forearm and your upper arm and your hand and your shoulder are all turning in the same direction. Right. So you've got this extension and everything turns over. Right. And then a spiral is that same twist in your forearm, same extension, but your upper arm goes in the opposite direction. Right.
Whoa.
So that essentially you now have an articulating thing where one part of your arm is going one way and another part's going another way. And this can sort of continue through your body. Essentially at every large joint, it changes direction, right? So your elbow is one, your shoulder's another, your hip is another, and you can, and full disclaimer, don't do this without somebody showing you how to do it first, because you'll probably hurt yourself. But that's the sequence, right? So you get this.
Sometimes saw that the counter twisting that
Right.
you use to create spiraling,
Right.
where different aspects of the arm are twisting one way or the other, and they sort of counter each other to create this very strong, organic but squishy chain of musculature that's very strong.
And so one way to think of it is, you can take my hand, right, and I can stick it out with no, turning over, right? So that's a stretch, right? You can turn it over without stretching, right? And if you combine the stretching and the turning over, that gives you a twist. And if you turn one part of your arm one way and one part another way, that gives you a spiral. Right? And that's like the simplest way to conceptualize that.
So I think what you're saying is, like, the book itself is mostly talking about twisting, but he calls it spiraling in the sense that this is the beginning of that type of spiraling movement that you're going to work on. Eventually in Cloud Hands, your spiral is going to get more and more sophisticated. This exercise merely teaches you to lift your arm, turn the palm over as it extends, and then turn the palm down as you press down to the ground. So that's the most, the simplest form of spiraling you can possibly do.
A light spiral, if you will, right?
Yeah. And I think the one thing that stands out here is that he says here that you, as in all Taoist body practices, the spiraling of the arm begins at the space between the spine and the shoulder blade, continues through the shoulder, upper arm, elbow, and forearm, and completes in the fingers.
Right. So that's this sort of wave that moves through your arm as it extends, right? An internal stretch and an external stretch from somebody watching you do the movement don't look that different, right? You can do Cloud Hands as an external stretching motion. Most people wouldn't be able to tell the difference. But what this is getting into is this idea that you have things inside your body that can stretch, right? And so this twisting motion is starting to stretch things on a horizontal plane, right? Mostly at this point in your arm and in your shoulder, but it's just getting you used to like twisting motions as opposed to just sort of reaching straight out, right?
Mm-hmm. that twisting and spiraling gives you a sort of structural strength so that you don't overextend and damage a joint, because you've got sort of a pretty strong bridge without tension.
Yeah, and it transfers pressure. I mean, it literally takes pressure away from your joint or around your joints, right? So if you think about, putting your arm straight out in front of you and trying to like stop something, if you have your joints locked and and everything stretched out completely, you've got nothing to absorb the shock, right? So this twisting action and this opening from the shoulder is essentially creating a shock absorber to take pressure from the arms to the spine and from the spine back to the arms.
And this is a big deal because this is what you do in Tai Chi, Xing Yi, Bagua. Even if you're going to do massage on somebody, you need to make all these same connections to make the most efficient motions to create power in your body without clenching it up and tightening it up and crunching down on it.
Yeah,
So it spends a lot of time on this small thing, but
even if you don't want to do any of those things and you just work at a computer all day, this is at least have a sense of being able to, like move your shoulder blades and loosen up your shoulders and your neck.
Right.
You can do this sort of arm twisting, stretching thing for 5 minutes, and you can.
Isn't it all so much easier when you can just grab a hold of somebody and twist them and show them how to do this, like on the spot? All these explanations verbally. It's like, I just want to grab the arm and do it on that arm. And then it all just makes a lot more sense when somebody's twist. I know when you did that for me, it like all sort of came together like,
absolutely.
It's a physical action I can do.
Right. I mean,
it's not a mental activity,
that's where you can only go so far with either verbal or even just visual stuff, that on some level, if you don't ever feel it on someone else or have someone else do it to you, it's extremely difficult to make some of these connections, right? So just taking this, this piece about extending from the shoulder blade, right? Most people, when they first do that, what they're doing is they're extending from the sort of the AC joint, right? There's sort of the joint at the tip of the shoulders, and not actually getting the space between the spine and the shoulder blade to move. Because if you're looking at it from the front, it looks the same, right? You can sort of push your collarbone forward a little bit, and that will make your arm stretch out. But that doesn't necessarily do anything to open and close the space between your shoulder blade. Whereas if you have someone put their hand on your shoulder blade and physically move it forward, you get the sense of how when your shoulder blade moves, your whole arm goes, right? So what Energy Gates does primarily is from the tip of the shoulder to the wrist doesn't really do much. The shoulder blade does most of the forward and back, and then you just do the twisting with the arm. So from the wrist to the shoulder just turns over, right? And so you've got the forward motion from the shoulder blade, you've got the up and down motion from the arm, but there's not a whole lot of bending in the elbow or anything like that. It's very, it's these two dimensions, right? You've got forward and back, and you've got up and down, and your shoulder does most of the movement. And that's, that sounds really easy, but it is to use Bruce's term, absolute mindfuck in the beginning to try to get your intent, your awareness to start from your shoulder and to move forward, right? Rather than to sort of take your hand and throw that out into space.
Right. Shove your hand at something instead of, starting from the shoulder and working your way out. That has to become programmed over time. You got to set those pathways through training before it becomes natural.
First, you make the path mentally, then you do the physical action. And then at some point, the physical action and the mental intent merge, and you don't have to really think about it anymore. When you move your arm, your shoulder goes with it,
Right.
But it does take a period of time to like make that link. That's the whole practice of energy gates, though, is essentially is to link all of these different parts to your spine.
All right. Well, it's been great talking to you.
All right, man.
In a couple weeks.
Talk to you soon.
Bye.